Hello and welcome, weary podcast traveler. This is my viewfinder. After moving to Calgary and building a family here, I've become much more aware of the burdens of both race and gender, of sexuality, political leanings, and basically any defining characteristic that allows the definition of the capital O, other. Shout out to existentialism. Earlier this year, I came across the work of a friend of mine here in Calgary, Esther Cho. Esther wears so many hats. Professionally, she's a nurse who now works in the administrative and technological end of the nursing administration in Alberta. But as a creative, she's a photographer and a poet. She has shared with me, and through the Perspectives While I See project, her personal experiences and amazing body of work. She's become prominent in the Calgary hip-hop scene, and frankly, I can't even keep track of all the work she does. She has boundless energy. The work that I saw, however, was a piece on the experience of gender roles as a Korean. I didn't need to read the accompanying poem to understand that. As soon as I glimpsed it through the stream on Instagram, I immediately scrolled back and I had to click. The imagery of painted hands over their mouths, for me heightened in black and white, represented blood and censorship, and told me that I needed to have her on record to get the base of her experience. Does photography create an outlet for inner expression? Is it responsible for us having concepts of what we are or aren't, or should be or can't be? Does it create expectations and often unreliable projections of what is real? Or does it allow communication to occur, where these concepts can be absorbed, discussed, and evolve with the times? Ultimately, how can I find integrity in my own work if I can't answer these questions boldly and with rigor? Is it the role of a photographer to write a single one of these weird rhetorical questions? Let's see what Esther says on the matter.
What you were saying before, like how photography can be used or is used to shape or even control culture. Like I've never really even thought about that before, and I think that's so interesting. And even like when I think about that project that I did, like for the most part it was more just like expression of like an idea in my head, and also like a lot of it too was purely like just for like creativity or just like to try something new and fun. Like I wanted to take some portraits, but something a little bit different. And I wanted to try the paint and like, just like those little things. I was like, yeah, this will be a cool thing to just experiment with. It did get like a bit of response from different people, which I thought was interesting. And then I've never really given it that much thought on like why I did it either. So it'd be cool to kind of dive into that as well.
But in this particular project, because I know you've been doing a lot of, at least publicly on Instagram, you're doing a lot of portraiture fashion shots. You worked with 10 to 10 men. So there's already this personal and directed approach to your work. So do you remember like how the project in itself kind of came to your mind?
Yeah, there was a couple things that kind of inspired it, I guess, or led to it actually happening. So the first thing was I was just looking a lot at different people's photography, not on Instagram though. I was looking up, I scroll through Pinterest every so often, just because Pinterest has, its platform is a little bit more like, it's less about who's posting it. It's just like pictures after pictures after pictures. So I was looking through and I saw a bunch of different portraits where people were using paint on the face and like different lighting and stuff, and like really close up headshots where, you know, like really dramatic shadows and highlighting and lights, and then like paint or even like colored filters and stuff, just like really changing the face a lot, I guess. I don't know how to explain it.
Art, portrait, and fashion photography that was using, in essence, mixed medium and different lighting, gels and creative looks. And then I think you were talking about how lighting itself and color can alter how people look and the final way people are presented in these portraits. Does that sound kind of right?
Yeah. So that's kind of like where it kind of started, where I was thinking, I want to try something new, something different. And the idea of the kind of like Korean woman and the hand over the mouth, that part was a concept, I guess, or an idea that I'd had for a very, very long time, because it's something that I have experienced throughout my life, I guess, as a Korean woman too. And a lot of it has to do with, I I mean, there's a whole side of it where it's like, you know, being a woman entails a lot of things, and growing up as like growing up female, and like in the culture I had, like it was a lot of like, oh, you know, girls have to be quiet, or girls shouldn't be too loud, or girls this and that. Like there's that side of it. But I think more of it for me anyway was around the Korean culture aspect of it. In Korean culture, like if you're young or if you're inexperienced, or like if you're young, actually is probably the biggest thing. Like you never talk back to someone who's older than you. Like the language, there's a whole aspect of formality if you're speaking to someone older than you. And I grew up in a Christian Baptist church as well. So there's like all of that Korean culture mixed in with like kind of religious hierarchy and stuff too, which adds a whole nother layer to it. And so I've always grown up thinking like, okay, I'm not a typical Korean in that like I'm pretty tall for a Korean person. Like born in Canada, I don't speak Korean very well at all. Just like culturally very different, but then growing up still being expected to kind of follow those cultural rules, but like never really understanding it and never really liking it either. And I don't know if this is getting too off topic, but I'll share like one quick story. When I was 19, I went to Thailand for a few months to do like volunteer work. It was like a mission trip basically, but I was like helping teach English at this school. But the school that was there was started by missionaries from South Korea. So these were people that are like, you know, they've never lived in Canada. They're very different from me, very Korean people. But like, yeah, when I was there was a huge language barrier, which made it really difficult to like understand what their rules and their cultures were for like the house, for example. So like this one guy who like he came from Korea every few months to teach Taekwondo to the kids that were there. Very old guy, very traditional. And I remember so distinctly, like when I first met him, he like reamed me out for not knowing how to speak Korean, and just like lectured me for so long. And I was like, I just met you. Like, I don't even know who you are. And he just like ripped me a new one for not knowing Korean. And then that meal too, all of the men sat at the table on regular chairs, and all of the women sat on the floor and ate. And I was just like, this is crazy. Like, this is so bizarre to me. But it also wasn't new, because it's not like I hadn't seen that before. Like, that's pretty typical. I was just, I think, really shooken up at the time because I had just been like lectured by someone I just met. But anyways, I obviously couldn't say anything back. I could have, but it wouldn't have gone anywhere. And I would have just been deemed as like super disrespectful. And even like when I came back, I had found out that the other missionaries there like thought I was really disrespectful because I like didn't really follow a lot of their cultural expectations, but I like literally didn't know what they were. We couldn't communicate. So that story kind of being the culmination of a lot of experiences in my life, it kind of just, it made me, yeah, I just felt like I couldn't say anything. Even though I had all these thoughts or whatever, like I was basically voiceless. And so that's kind of where that idea of the hand over the mouth came from, where like there's just all these cultural expectations, gender expectations, and really what it does is it just left me feeling like I had nothing to say. I couldn't say anything, and I was very trapped. And there was actually a lot of photos that we took after where I tried to get the models, Eugene and Amelia, to like scream at the camera as well, because it was going to be kind of like the first photos are where you're trapped, you can't say anything. And then the next set would be like basically trying to break out of it. Those photos didn't really turn out well though, unfortunately, so I couldn't like use them. So it kind of changed the overall project a bit, but yeah.
The pictures I find quite powerful, right? I like them a lot. But I might be informed too by my experiences. So, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of, particularly with women, there are so many common problems with just how women are expected to behave, etc. That will be cross-cultural. But I think a lot of Korean people, if they saw that, with recognizably Korean women, are not even going to need your backstory. I think they're just going to be like, oh, fuck, like, this has to have been taken by a Korean woman because, there's a strong theme there.
Yeah, like I grew up as a Canadian Korean in like a community that was like that was basically all white. Like all of my elementary school pictures, I'm the only Asian kid. Like that's like kind of the setting I grew up in Calgary. So then kind of from a very young age, I grew up always feeling like very different and very like outcast. And then a lot of my like good friends were other Canadian Korean kids like from church. So that's kind of where I found my like community. But I remember like as I was getting older in high school and university, I started meeting a lot of first generation Koreans that immigrated here for school specifically. And then yeah, just getting a lot of like criticism or getting made fun of a lot for like not knowing Korean, for not knowing Korean was like the biggest thing, I feel like, because that's like the first thing that people will realize. So when that experience in Thailand happened, it just again like reinforced this like bitterness that like, oh, like I'm never accepted by Korean people, but I'm not white. And so it's like that second generation immigrant story is like so classic in that you just like feel lost. Like there's that identity crisis, I guess, where you don't really feel like one or the other. So in my like early 20s, it was a lot of that kind of narrative in my life where I was always just like, I don't really understand like who I am. And I knew I wasn't a white person. I wasn't fully Canadian or whatever you want to call it. But I also like couldn't really make peace with my Korean culture either, or like pursue my Korean culture because I was so like bitter about it. And I also just, it didn't make sense to me either. So for a very long time, for a majority of my 20s, I just like, so early 20s, I was wrestling still with it. I still wanted to sort of like hold on to my Korean culture. And I think because of the time too, I was still like attending church and a lot of my friends were Korean. But then like 23-ish is when I ended up like, I stopped going to church, which is like a whole other story, but stopped going to church and I lost touch with a lot of like the Korean people in my life and Korean like adults, like the first generation people I saw all the time on Sundays, like stopped seeing them. So I stopped like having to even practice any Korean at all. But yeah, once that happened, then I basically just like cut ties with my culture, period. I was like, I'm done. Like I'm Korean and I like Korean food. My parents are Korean, but like, I'm not learning Korean ever. Like I'm never going to speak it and I don't need to. And like, I just, for a while, just totally dropped it. And I kind of just gave up on it in terms of like trying to find an identity. And I was like, no, I'm a second generation Korean, or I'm a Canadian Korean. And like it itself is its own identity and I'm cool with that. It doesn't have to be either or. But like, I was okay with that and I was at peace with that. But there was still always like, you could just tell I was a bitter person. I think we've had conversations about this prior to where we were just like, where I just kind of had these like bitter comments that just come out naturally. But interestingly enough, just in like maybe the last couple of months, I think for a while, maybe the last like couple years leading up to it, I've been really trying to like make more effort to spend more time with my parents. And like when my sister passed away in 2018, that was like for me a huge wake up call, in that like I don't want to take any time with my family for granted. And it really brought us closer together too. So I was like, okay, from then on, I really want to spend more time with them. I want to hang out with them more and talk with them more, especially while they're like relatively healthy and able to. So that's kind of, it started there. And then I was like, the thought came always where I was like, maybe I should learn Korean because then I can speak better with my dad, especially because his English is not very good. So like my dad has so many like very interesting stories to share, but like it's hard for him to explain some things because he just can't speak English very well. So I'm like, okay, I should learn, but I always put it off and I was way too busy doing millions of other things anyway. So I was like, it just never happened. And then now with COVID, now that I'm stuck at home all the time, like photography is on the back burner right now. Like I can't meet with anyone. I can't really do anything that. So I've been like trying to find new hobbies and stuff. And one of them is I just started like studying Korean again, interestingly enough, like 2 weeks ago, maybe. So that's been like a very interesting experience, coming full circle back to this kind of like trying to make amends with it almost. And it brings up a lot of feelings, oddly enough, because I'm like, oh, so many memories from like trying to speak this language. But it's not as painful as it was when I was younger, because I think I just have a different perspective on it now and I'm doing it for a different reason, I guess.
I have similar experiences but a different output. Like listening to you, you seem to, I think, be interested in like even the piece that you did for the magazine. There, I mean, other than how personal and kind of searching it is, there are your human forms in both pieces. So there's something I think that you've been reaching out to express, perhaps that you couldn't and weren't allowed to express anything. I want to kind of like bring it up that way just because of this central idea I have. Whether, for example, the piece that you created is about expressing who you think you are or the roles that exist. I mean, even the idea of like a more abstract, like the image of a good Korean, person. I don't know if you did sebe, but like dressing up in a hanbok and like kneeling down in front of your parents and like, the correct way to lower one knee. Like you can't even just bow because there are incorrect ways of doing that. And then like on a funnier side, like, Helen and I have been watching, so I've also been softening up on this Korean culture thing. So I watched my first K-drama on Netflix, but Crash Landing Onto You is like the best show I've ever watched in my life.
I also tried to watch that. I couldn't finish it, but I watched another one shortly after, just like another one my friend suggested. It's called Signal. You should watch it. You should watch it.
So we watched that, and then we've always liked, these dance and fashion and like these competition shows that were all the rage in the Americas. So 2 new ones came out. There's 2 fashion ones, and they featured Korean designers. And what's funny and fascinating is they're both female fashion designers, and they're obsessed with hanboks. There's an image in everybody's head about the correct way to dress, the correct way to look, and I wonder if photography plays a role in that. This might not actually be explicit, but do you think that there's a role that photography plays in telling you both like how you're supposed to be? I mean, that's I think the problem with social media, but also in your art practice, that you find that's informing how you approach like even setting up Amelia and Eugene, and like, for example, wanting them to express in that case like anger and release. I mean, what is it about those pictures that you felt didn't work? There's something interesting about that, right? And maybe, and I don't know because I haven't seen them, but I wonder if like in 10 years you'll go back and they may work for you at that point.
Yeah, that's a good question. For sure, I definitely agree that photography and more so specifically social media like influences a lot on like what we end up posting or what we end up even shooting to begin with. I think I have such a love-hate relationship with Instagram, because Instagram on the positive end like largely brought me to where I am now. Like I've met so many people through Instagram, so I really can't like absolutely hate on it. It definitely like opened a lot of doors, and I met so many good friends that I have now through it. So in some sense like it was super helpful, but at the same time I have to be really careful when I'm like looking and scrolling through my business account or my photography account, because there's an oversaturation of like a certain type of photo or like a style of photo, and then so there's that piece, but also like you kind of want your feed to look a certain way. There's like, if I'm selling myself as a photographer, like as my business, then I have to think about what photos are on my feed, because that's what people often see first before they decide to message me. So like there's that element, and I have to even like the feed itself, like, planning when you're gonna post stuff. And like I hate that I do this, but I can't help it. I look at it, I'm like, okay, I want to there at least be like a good balance of color, and I want it to be this and that, because if someone's new and they come to my page, they're just gonna quickly scroll, so I want it to at least be like grabbing. But then it does force me to like really calculate when I'm gonna post things and this and that, which annoys me, but it's like part of it. And then the photos that like I felt like didn't turn out, it's because like, well, on one hand they didn't really like look the way I was envisioning it in my head, so there was that part of it. But the other two is that like it wasn't the most flattering photo of my friends, and I didn't want to post those, which that is kind of part of the social media thing where I'm like, oh, I don't really want to post these photos of them, like put them on blast when they're not like the most appealing or like attractive photos and stuff.
There's always this tension. So for me, I think before there's a general, I mean, I'm often called, anti-capitalist or communist or whatever, but there's a tension between this idea of having to market and sell either yourself or your work or an image or something. And I think the social capital, whatever the catchphrase lately, it's very real and I think overpowering. I think it's interesting that you bring up this idea, because something that I think a lot about, which I hope that this process I can learn more about, is whether there's such a thing as art for art's sake, or if everything that we do already is biased by this imagination that we have of who we think will see it. And that's a very broad thing. I mean, for example, if you're working with another human being, like I've done portrait work where I have the self-narrative that they don't like it in the end because I don't take out, stuff. In the last 2-3 years, what would happen is I would just get Helen to edit it for me, like in the final pass, because I would select contextual images almost like in a documentary sense where it's like, yeah, like they look like shit, but this is where they were.
Yeah.
They were sitting like this.
This was real.
Yeah, and they do look happy, but yeah, like there's a roll, there's a fucking this. Like, this is just how human beings look. And Helen's the one that's like, well, look, they're not going to want to see representations of themselves, regardless of the situation, in this light. And so from a business, I mean, I don't know, it's not like I'm a businessman, but like from a client-based perspective, that's a rational way to approach it. But for me personally, I will just put that out, I think. But I think that's also why I've been really, like you said, I've been very disassociative with photography in general for a little while. I just don't understand what my role is anymore in it. I wonder a lot about this stuff. Your project in particular, is the images that you posted, are they going to end up being a reflection of how you view yourself, or how you want people to see you? This person I've been watching a seminar from likens our modern photography age to idolatry, where we are building objects to worship in the form of people. I get really upset childishly when I read, Kendall Jenner has billion, whatever, like she's the most popular human being on earth. And I looked at Helen, I was like yelling. I was like, what has this person done other than been part of a trash fucking reality TV show family? That she's lauded as this like social, political, I don't know, like this goddess. And I don't know. And I'll be judged and probably told I'm wrong for having this opinion, because the flip side is idealistic, like that people have to, earn your respect or do something of cultural or social significance, which is also kind of a bullshit idea too, because I couldn't define to you what that means. Like when I read submissions for that first issue of the magazine, I think that everybody that put something in that I published had something of personal, social, or I don't know, just like expressive value to me. But that magazine, in reflection, has a lot of my bias too, because I turned away stuff as well that I thought didn't have a tone that I agreed with. But that's not purely unbiased stuff. This is why I want to have talks with people who create stuff.
Yeah, and I just had a thought too. So like on the note of like those portraits, and like I think for me, a lot of the photos that I've made, like kind of the more conceptual, artistic ones where I was like trying to like convey a message or something, express something personal, it always came kind of from a place of, there was an element of like, oh, it's like a healing process. It's like something that I can put my energy into that will help me like move forward. Like the grief photos I did, it was like something to like put the grief energy into. But largely, ultimately, for a lot of the projects I've done, they're all like kind of like attempts to be understood. the photos themselves, like I always feel like it has to be accompanied by some writing, because if there isn't any writing, they might not really get it. Like the viewer might not understand it. And to me, because the fact that I worry about that tells me like what I really want is for people to understand me more, and like to appreciate and understand like the pain or the struggle or the thought or whatever that I have that I'm trying to like put out in this picture. I don't know. It's interesting because I think when I was younger, early 20s, and even like up until maybe last year or just recently, I was always wanting to be understood. And I hated being misunderstood. And I like that again all ties to the Korean culture stuff too. Like I just hated like not being like just for people thinking that I'm something that I'm not or whatever. More so these days, I think it's part of it is just as I'm getting older and I'm just like losing energy and I just have less energy to care as much.
I think it's age is more when you get older and wiser, you realize none of it actually fucking matters.
Yeah, and truly like people, most of the time people won't try to understand you. They're gonna misunderstand you, and it's like that's just kind of where it ends. So yeah, I don't know. Like I've also been pretty like disconnected with photography these days as well. Like I haven't really tried to do anything because I'm just like I have nothing to shoot there's nothing in my mind right now. I'm just trying to survive. Like so yeah, I don't know. It's a weird, photography is a weird thing for sure, and like social media being a part of it too makes it that much more complicated, and I wrestle with it all the time.